Governor Newsom announced a plan to visit a lot of the red counties, the counties where Democrats have had a harder time, both in his reelection campaign and, of course, in the Kamala Harris election, or people who did not vote for Kamala Harris, counties that did not vote for her up and down the Central Valley for the most part. And even some House races that were surprisingly Republican. Those districts, the governor said, I want to visit there. And when he visited there, he continued to talk about how gas prices are the fault of big oil, how he's trying to transition to green energy jobs, and not necessarily make the most convincing message as opposed to maybe extending the olive branch. Tim, what are your thoughts on that? Just his strategy in coming down there. Is it a good thought and poor execution?
Well, he's not really trying to appeal to red county voters. This is an appeal to, national media, to statewide media. It gives him kind of an angle to get some additional press on this, but he's still going to be talking about the same things that he has talked about throughout his governorship and wants to take kind of to the national stage as he looks at potentially running for president in 2028. So no surprise there. It's just a new angle at the same message.
It's not totally indifferent, Tal, from his time before 2024, where he was going to all these red states, like in the South, and trying to pass along his message there, pretty much trying to go head to head, it seemed, with Ron DeSantis on conservative messaging as far as who's going to be the best young governor with the best hair gel.
Yeah, it's not totally unique for, I think, statewide Democrats to come to the San Joaquin Valley. Usually they end up meeting with, they struggle to meet with the elected officials that represent this area because oftentimes they're, not necessarily the biggest fans of them. I don't think he spent any time with our legislative delegation, either on the state or federal side. However, part of this could be simply like getting footage of him walking near ag fields or, near oil fields in the state of California, sort of like a bit of a playing tough a little bit, like kind of he can go anywhere, he'll talk to anybody sort of thing. But it didn't feel like there was necessarily any sort of tailoring of his message to voters in the San Joaquin Valley. It was sort of touting plans that were largely put together with input from CBOs about creating jobs and really not acknowledging some of the unique challenges that we face here. And we'll see in the coming, 18 months, couple of years, whether or not he begins to make a concerted effort to talk about issues that I think resonate with folks in the San Joaquin Valley, or if he simply wants to make the case that he's able to go to any part of the state that he is governor of, and deliver a speech.
And the person that he did do that speech with in Kern County was a former state lawmaker, Rudy Salas, who didn't necessarily have the best run of things with David Valadao. And it was an odd scene to kind of see him the two of them so close together right after the election, after it seemed like it was maybe a concerted effort on the part of Salas's team, probably not to bring him in for the whole time during the campaign cycle because of the thought of maybe a negative contrast of bringing in Newsom to be there. Is that a good read on that, Tim?
Yeah, I think that's a good read on it. I mean, the polling that I saw throughout the state in a lot of these districts was that Gavin Newsom polled worse than Joe Biden and Kamala Harris in many of these areas. He is someone who I think you see on the state level, Democrats, independents, and Republicans kind of pushing back at what has been foisted upon them by the Newsom administration here over the last several years. And even those Democrats who may have had a positive impression or voted for Kamala Harris, had a positive impression of the Biden administration, tend to look at the Newsom administration through a completely different lens. And I don't think that anything that he's done really changes that. And certainly you saw throughout California, not just in the district where Rudy Salas was running, where Democrats did not want Gavin Newsom coming in and campaigning with him. I think that's one of the first times I can remember where a sitting governor of that party didn't come in and campaign with folks running for Congress, folks running for state legislature in a lot of swing districts. So that really shows kind of the negativity that voters have of Gavin Newsom.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it's necessarily a question of Democratic Party stronghold because, like you said, with the lack of Newsom, we saw Bill Clinton campaigning around the OC in a bunch of different places too, trying to win those valuable House districts, but clearly it was something that Central Valley candidates wanted to stay away from. And when we look at the Central Valley isolated, there was a big performance, or some analysts would suggest overperformance. Some suggest maybe it's the new trend of Republican candidates throughout, even in tight races that they lost, like just to the north of us, Michael Maher falling to Jim Costa, but by only 5%, about a 5% margin as well, if not a little smaller, between the Josh Harder and Kevin Lincoln races in a seat that's supposed to be Cook PVI rates it as a +10 Democratic seat. What should have Newsom, I should say, what should he have focused on? I mean, you talked about some of those issues before. What are those things that really would have resonated better than coming in and getting asked those questions, as he was going to get asked by us, about moving away from oil and moving this transition to green energy way too fast?
It's going to come across as pretty Pollyanna-ish, but I think that the governor has time to make this effort. And I do think it could resonate in some of the states elsewhere in the country if he ends up, pursuing the presidency. But I think there's a lot to be proud of with the San Joaquin Valley, whether it's on the ag side, we literally feed the nation, feed the world, or on the energy side. I mean, there's traditional resource-based industries that are, sort of deep history in this region. However, many of those same entities are also on the cutting edge of clean energy too. So there's a lot he could talk about that I think would resonate with people, many whom rely on those industries for their jobs. But the promotional aspect of California, whether it's folks surfing in Southern California or, views of the Bay Bridge, some of what we do in the San Joaquin Valley, a lot of what we do in the San Joaquin Valley could resonate to those states that he's going to really struggle with taking that California and spreading it across many states across the union, right? So I would hope that he would pluck out those jewels in the San Joaquin Valley, including those resource-based industries that are also leading the way on water efficiency and, like I mentioned, clean energy. So it's not all bad from a progressive standpoint. I think there's lots to be proud of, and there are a few bright spots. I mean, Adam Gray appears to have pulled ahead, or has pulled ahead in the district just up to 99 from you guys in Bakersfield, right? So they're actually going to pick up seats in the San Joaquin Valley. So there's things that they can build upon. I just don't know if it's yet what he's chose to talk about thus far in the days following the election.
If that is true, our buddy Professor Nathan Monroe's going to need to make a new hire up there soon for CAPE, something in that program. One of the other things that I think is interesting, Tim, is that where this took place, it did take place at one of these concrete plants, one of these places that's going to try and change into more of a renewable energy, a clean energy place. But it's also in Lebec, which, for people that don't know the geography, Lebec, maybe around the 5 square miles in that whole mountainous area in between Bakersfield and Los Angeles, has about 20,000 people at most, less than that are actually in Lebec. It's not exactly going into the heart of Bakersfield or going near the oil worker community and having a real conversation about this transition.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It is a place where there's a lot of new development. There is some entrepreneurship over in that part of the Central Valley, but it isn't going into the oil fields. It isn't going on to a generations old family farm. That's not where this event took place. And I think going back to what Tal said, certainly there's a lot to tout in the Central Valley, and things that are kind of dynamic and exciting that are going on, developments within the industry, the free market kind of taking hold, and as industries develop and they continue to transition and do that as people are looking for different solutions and expanding solutions. But the fact is Gavin Newsom so far, throughout his entire administration, has been very myopic in his focus on certain elements of those issues, and doing it in a prescribed way that he wants. And that is something I think that has California voters, at least at the state legislative level, kind of rebuffed this past election, with Republicans picking up seats in the state legislature. It looks like 2 seats in the state assembly, holding a D+10 seat in the state Senate, and then also picking up a Republican state Senate seat in Southern California. So I think that voters, to some extent, kind of separated what was going on at the national level and folks who are running for Congress and also the presidency, with kind of what is going on here at home, and that distaste that they have, or distrust maybe, of Gavin Newsom and some of his policies, and wanting to see that counterbalance, and doing so with casting their votes, particularly some Democrats and independents casting their votes for Republicans in the state legislature.
I think the big question that I know that everyone's going to be looking at these next couple of years is, I know that these seats make a big difference for the state legislature and they make a big difference for these House districts. The question will be, does it make a big difference in that 2026 governor's primary in trying to get those votes, to win over those votes? Tim, I guess back to you on that first. What do you think? Do you think that this is going to be highly sought after territory, that Central Valley will be in the lead up to that 2026 governor's election?
Oh, I think the Central Valley is absolutely essential in the 2026 governor's election. We know kind of that Los Angeles and San Francisco, you have large vote centers there, but I think where that margin is going to be closed is going to be in the Central Valley. And you think about that particularly in a primary campaign where there's bound to be numerous Democratic candidates running for governor. And if we have kind of what's happened in years past, at least in recent years past, you have, let's say 5, 6, 7, well-funded Democratic candidates, and maybe, 2, 3 Republican candidates running. Well, there's going to be a Republican that gets that, top 1 or 2 seat, and there's going to be a Democrat that gets that top 1 or 2 seat. It's the math is hard with those numbers to get 2 Democrats at the top. And so, the Democratic candidates that are campaigning in that primary are really going to have to focus and try to win the hearts and minds of the Central Valley, because there's a lot of Democratic voters in the Central Valley that will be participating in those primaries that don't necessarily see eye to eye with their, party compatriots that live in Los Angeles and San Francisco and San Diego and some of the more coastal areas. So it's going to be pretty important.
And Tal, I guess to you, I mean, we see just about everyone that Newsom's appointed to a position with inside his cabinet appears to be running for this election. Is that going to be a good association or a bad association? And of course, while this maybe initial rollout of visiting these red counties isn't working as he hoped, is there at least a chance in these next couple of years that they can make a difference and try to maybe dissociate or further associate themselves with the governor?
Yeah, I do think that, especially in Kern County, my take has always been that there's an expectation that elected officials show up. In Kern County, when you have a member of Congress or a state assembly person, like, they'll participate in a parade and they'll stay the whole time. That's not the case elsewhere in other communities that I've worked in the state. So I do think there's a value to showing up. I believe, as Tim mentioned, it's going to be crowded, especially from a Democratic standpoint. I think Antonio Villaraigosa, several years ago, spent a little more time in the San Joaquin Valley, and I think he had a message that I wouldn't describe it as necessarily conservative, but just more of a nuanced approach to our region, right? Like, there's many issues that just simply don't fit if you're talking to folks in Los Angeles or the Bay Area when you get to the San Joaquin Valley. It's not like you have to peel back your core beliefs or support some policy that you could never defend in the future. Some of it's showing up, as I mentioned, and a lot of it's just recognizing that we rely heavily on certain industries, and there needs to be a plan for what happens going forward. So when elected officials talk about moving away from oil, or they say that we're going to have a smaller ag footprint going forward, what does that mean for those communities that are co-located with those industries? No one's ever articulated that, right? I mean, the joke has been sort of learn to code. So if you're a 70-year-old woman who's worked in a packing shed for 30 years, what is the state or the federal government's plan for you? And I don't know there's ever been a Democrat who's articulated a message there. I think Gavin Newsom's a fantastic communicator. I think he's capable of conveying that message, or any of the candidates that have indicated interest. We'll see if they do in the coming weeks and months.
And I guess that's the question. Once you get past the primary, how important is the Central Valley for that full state campaign? Once you get it down to those 2 people, and of course, I think it probably also the thought there too is, who is in that final 2? Is it 2 Democrats, or is it a Democrat and a Republican in those top 2 finishers? Tim, I guess to you on that point, Tal brought up a couple interesting names there too, and some good points about Antonio Villaraigosa. What are your thoughts on him as a candidate? I know we've talked about him a number of times before. Can he get over the hump, where I know he finished 3rd in the time where you were helping out with the John Cox campaign?
Yeah, I think that, somebody like Antonio Villaraigosa, who is, as Tal says, shown up. He's demonstrated that he's been there in the San Joaquin Valley and has a little bit of information, certainly about the region. He served as Speaker of the Assembly. Yes, he was mayor of Los Angeles, but he has a little bit broader knowledge of the state of California as a whole and some of the nuances, geographically throughout the state. I think that who comes out of that primary. And I can't believe we're talking about we just got out of a presidential race. We're talking about the governor's primary, governor's race going on in 2026. But whoever comes out of that primary, that Democrat, is going to be critically important for the Central Valley because it is extremely hard. Some would say almost impossible at this point, or impossible. But it is, let's say, it's extremely hard for a Republican to win statewide in California. So whomever, if it is a Democrat versus a Republican for the governor's, running for the governor's, ticket, governor's office. That Democrat who comes out of that primary, and what their perspective is, if they are kind of out of touch, far left progressive on certain issues, really reflect kind of the values of San Francisco and Los Angeles. That looks far different to the Central Valley than does a Democrat, let's say, like an Antonio Villaraigosa or others who have demonstrated, hey, look, I at least want to listen. I will show up, and I've got some base of knowledge and information and understand how the place works. And so I think that is going to be critical to watch as those candidates start to kind of stake out their places in the Democratic governor's race lineup.
Well, Tim, my first job out of college for a TV station was working in Wyoming in the month of January 2021. And we talk about a long primary season. Right after being elected, Liz Cheney was already getting primaried by 2 state representatives. A whole host of other people already threw their names in too. So I'm just used to it. That's that's been my new normal since COVID. Everyone talks about a new normal and COVID. That was mine.
That's it.
Long
Yeah.
campaigns. But Tal, last question to you on this too. Uh, when we think about as a presidential race, we thought about the attachment of Harris to Biden and the policies of the Biden administration. I've told you that I just asked you that last question too about the association with Newsom. Is that a serious concern when it gets down to the last 2 candidates or the 2 top Democratic candidates in the primary, that you would have Villaraigosa, who's totally independent of Newsom, or some other Democrat that gets popular, like maybe a Katie Porter is another good example, or Kamala Harris. And then you have that Newsom associate, maybe like Kounalakis or one of the other members of his staff that are running, of his cabinet that are running. Is that a bad association to have, especially in this part of the state?
Well, we'll see. I mean, I think the era of a traditional campaign where you go around glad handing party leaders and earn endorsements and then hope that the party nominates you through their process, I wonder if that's over with, right? So with President Trump being reelected, I think this era of personality is going to become even more important than it already was. It's actually a version of what we saw with Governor Schwarzenegger, right? Where all of a sudden these individuals can become more popular than the very platforms by which, we used to choose who gets these nominations, right? So I think you could see someone from Hollywood, you could see a business leader step in, and maybe they're a registered Democrat, because there is still that, the parties do play a role in California, especially as it relates to resources and the way you're able to move money around for campaigns. But I wonder if the era of having to work through party bosses is just gone. I mean, I think we've seen it at the national level. It may well be gone. I believe there will be Democrats nationally that look upon this presidential campaign and think, shoot, we should have done taken a different approach than just sort of anointing somebody, right? So I wonder if the reality will be that a personality rises to the top and kind of works beyond traditional party buckets, for lack of a better term. And that may pose problems, right? I mean, think about some of the high profile folks going into the Trump administration. Most of them are Democrats. A couple of them, I think, live in California or have or will, up until their service, I suppose. So anyway, I wonder if we're just past the time of a party having a role, and it's really about the personalities. And I think Villaraigosa is a good example. Someone who has a big personality, is compelling as a speaker, and may well just be able to work beyond and outside of whatever traditional approach to becoming the gubernatorial candidate that existed in the past.
And, if we look across the aisle, even though it's highly unlikely that we'll see a Republican win, the last Senate candidate was Steve Garvey. And the three names that seem to be up for grabs here that could be one of those top two this go around in this governor's race are social media famous Sheriff Chad Bianco, Steve Hilton, who has a well-known or used to have a media show on Fox, but is still a well-known media personality, and of course Caitlyn Jenner as well. So three distinctive personalities that could be in those top two that have all expressed interest in running for governor. It'll be fascinating to watch, and of course on the Democrat side too, we'll just wait and see who happens. Potentially the person who just lost the presidential election could be the front runner for that race as well. So we'll be looking forward to it. But first, we're going to be looking forward to Thanksgiving. And thank you guys so much for joining me on Thanksgiving Eve. We appreciate it and having some time to talk about Governor Newsom's trips down to the Central Valley.
Thank you.
Well.